It's been a good meeting. I'm Bill Crawford, and I'm an alcoholic. So far, and I don't believe I can screw it up too bad. I'm sorry that I missed Tom last night. I heard he did good at wherever you talked. Wasn't here. It was at the local group, wasn't it? Tom, you paying attention? Yeah, at the local group. And I am sorry I missed the Alateen. Took me home to put my suit on today while the Alateens were speaking. I heard they were just wonderful, but I did get back to hear Bob, and he was great, as I knew he would be, and I heard he would be. Some of you heard this before and are nice enough to ask me back, sort of, well, it's not the same territory in Texas, but some of you have been, even some people that heard me on the other end of Texas have driven over here and loved me enough to hear me again, and I'm grateful for that. I was born up in Greensboro, North Carolina, or over in Greensboro, North Carolina, 50 years ago. I was born in one of those good Christian homes, Southern Baptist homes, but I was also born in an alcoholic home. And that's important to me because I like to remember that alcoholism was in control of my life for a long, long time from earliest memory. You know, if alcoholism is somewhere, it's in control. It's a powerful disease, and it was in control in our house. Now, we couldn't appreciate that. But I know in retrospect, because what you have taught me, that alcoholism owned that family. And alcoholism, if it exists anywhere, but especially in the family, is going to be in control unless one thing happens, unless somebody gets well, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But nobody got well in my house, my family of origin, at least as we know wellness. So we just kind of reacted to it and lived under and with its power. Now, if you raised a Baptist, and most of you know what they've got to say about beverage alcohol, and you're raised in an alcoholic home, you might guess that one would have a negative view. Alcohol would have a negative image in the mind of that child. It did with me. I like to say my childhood heroes didn't drink. I just didn't see anything good with drinking. And you young people ain't going to know what I'm talking about, but Lash LaRue and the Durango Kid did not drink. And them bad guys drank, but those good guys in those big westerns, if you remember, they didn't drink. And drinking sort of had that negative image, and I had that it was bad. And I knew that I would never drink because we knew we didn't know alcoholism what was wrong with Daddy, but we knew that the drinking caused it. And so I knew I'd never partake of that stuff. And along came something called peer pressure. And I wasn't using terms like peer pressure back then, but I know now that I've become informed that that's what that was. And peer pressure simply wanting to be like some group that you look up to or admire. And I guess I had lived with peer pressure all my life, but along came puberty, and peer pressure gets keener. And I was downtown, and I guess I was about 14 years old in Greensboro when people came to downtown Greensboro. They don't do that much anymore. They're out the shopping center. And outstanding in front of Mann's O. Henry Drugstore were three of the finest looking boys I'd ever seen in my life. A little bit older than me, but they looked good. Their hair was combed straight back on the sides, and it was squared off in the back. Now, you young people are going to give me a blank stare, too, because you're not going to know what this means, but you older boys will remember this. Shirt collar stood straight up. And they wore the breeches real low, almost dangerously low. And the breeches had big knees and little bitty cups. Cool was the word then. Thought it was finest looking. I didn't know what I seen. I later got with somebody who said these are cats. Now, this is back before hippies or beatniks or anything. These were cats of the day. And this is one of my earliest burning ambitions, is to become a cat. And to make my way down in front of Mann's O. Henry and look cool. And so I did. It wasn't hard to become a cat, at least by the image. And I went down and got me some big-kneed breeches with the little cuffs, draped breeches. Got me a starch collar and stood it straight up. Had a little hair problem. I had real fine hair, still do, real hard to control. That's back in the days of Wild Root cream oil. I'm getting a blank stare from the young people now, but I'd put a half a bottle of Wild Root cream oil on that stuff, and it still wouldn't do. And I had an advisor that was giving me some cat advice, and he introduced me to a product called pomade. I never will forget it. And I laugh at that Final Net commercial that you see on TV. It's got the woman that goes through a real hectic day, and at the end of the day, she's pooped, but her hair's in place. And it just tickles them Final Net people to death that hair stayed in place all day. Pomade hold your hair for 3 months. You combed it like you wanted it. If a train hit you and if they could find your head, your hair would be in place. And so I had the image that I wanted, and I made my way downtown and got with these boys, and by then I'd learned how to smoke cigarettes. Cuss a little bit, and smoking cigarettes didn't come easy either. This is something, peer pressure sort of flung on me, and that inhaling I wasn't a natural with it. It's not just something I took right to. I remember when I first learned about inhaling, I'd only inhale if somebody's looking. I don't know if you went through that or not. It just about killed me. I wouldn't waste one unless I had an audience. And if those boys had turned my way, I'd grab me a big drag and grab a tree or something or whatever and inhale. So I was inhaling and had me some pants, and my hair had the pomade in it, and I had the right look. And there was only one thing that was left out in that deal, and that was the drinking. Because these boys were the boys that were the hippiest. These were the boys that were having the most fun. These boys were the boys that were the toughest and into more adventure. And that's what I wanted, and they were drinking. Now, I learned something real important then. I really couldn't conceptualize what I was learning, but I know in retrospect again what I learned. That the power of that peer pressure was greater than the power of any fear and guilt I had associated with alcohol. The pull of that peer pressure was greater than any negative feelings. And I had that guilt and that fear and all those bad feelings about alcohol, but I wanted to be like them, so I began to drink. I began to drink simply because that's what they did. And this is my social drinking period. Right along in here. And I can't remember how long it lasted. Might have lasted a month. Might have lasted 2 months. It lasted for as long as it took for me to get enough in me to feel it. And that may have lasted, like I say, only a couple of months where I took a sip of this or a swallow of that or half a can of beer. I remember I didn't like the taste of any of it. But one night, me and old Charles DeLigny and Sonny Schaffner were down at the downtown cemetery where we'd go for privacy, and we were sitting down on the tombstones drinking a product called Old Mr. Mac wine. And for the first time, I ingested enough to know the feeling that most of us in this room know as intoxication. And I never drank again for any other reason except to regain that feeling. We were talking about that this afternoon. What a powerful thing that is. What this stuff does for us is indescribable. I've had the privilege of talking with all sorts of groups. And I never even attempt to go into that except with any other body of folks except right here at meetings like this because they can't understand. And Tom, I think, while we were talking this afternoon, said it's what it does for us that gets us in trouble with it. It's what it does to us that gets us here. And right then, it did more for me than, as I say, I could describe to any other group of people, any other person. It made the world out where it belonged. It made me enough. It made me comfortable in a world, for the most part, that I considered uncomfortable. Now, what it did, was it made the fear go away, and it doesn't do that for everybody. And I didn't know I had been living on fear, but somehow, at some deep level, that night, I knew that something went away that was bad. And I was okay, and they were okay, and it was okay. Now, if some observer had been out there looking at me, they could have said, and rightly so, that a drinking pattern set forth. I drank at every opportunity from then on. Fear and the guilt was still there. I still associated beverage alcohol with the bad stuff and daddy and all that kind of stuff, but I drank at every opportunity. I was half an alcoholic that night, if I'm to believe what the big book says that alcoholism is. And if we read our book of experience, it's defined pretty clearly. We've got a mental obsession coupled with a physical allergy. And I didn't have the physical allergy that night. It took a little while, but I had the mental obsession, I know now. And to regain that feeling became a preoccupation. When I wasn't drinking, I looked forward to drinking. Now, I just assumed everybody got that much out of it, that we all looked forward to drinking for drinking's sake. I know now that other guys in that group looked forward to the ball game or whatever they were going to do. Me, it was drinking. Anything that went along with the drinking was incidental. And so life went on. I started getting older and drinking, and I told myself that out there someday I'm not going to drink anymore. And I think anybody from my kind of background probably or I'm going to settle down and do it right. And those were the days where drinking a lot was okay, Drink 4 beers and tell everybody the next day you had 14. Remember those days? Know how that reverses as you get on into this thing. You drink 36 and tell some judge you've had 2. But that was the days where you lied in reverse from the way it was going to be. And so it looked good. And alcohol was not doing so much to me. Or so it seemed. There was some puking and stuff till I got it right, and some embarrassing things, and some scrapes with authority, and maybe some close calls with my parents. But basically, it seemed to be doing so much for me, and it seemed to be that we were all doing it. And so I knew one day out there I was going to quit, and I did. Life went on. I got older. I even went to a little bit of college. I know now how much this disease interrupted any education I might have had, but then it was just the bad breaks. My day, it was important to go in the Army. You had to go in the Army. You just couldn't get a job. So I went in the Army. Before they could draft me, I was kicked out of school, college. And I joined the Army, and they made me a neuropsychiatric technician. For an anniversary, you ought to have a professional talking, I think. Kind of gives it an extra flavor, and I don't mind. Most of you can't even spell that, and I was one for almost 3 years in the Army. Let me explain that to you laymen, what a neuropsychiatric technician is. That's a keeper in the nut house in the Army. Now, to educate you a little bit more, if you would come in on the ward cold, uninformed, and you were wanting to know which wall to back up against, the way you told the keepers from the kept wore blue pajamas. Us keepers had whites on, and we all had a set of keys. And they ran me through a little training that taught me just enough psychology to worry about it. I don't know if you were that kind of hypochondriac now. Everything I'd hear about, I'd catch, and they'd talk about schizophrenia and all that stuff, and I'd secretly know, by God, I feel like that. And I can't let them know I'm just as crazy as these nuts. So I've spent a lot of time walking around looking as sane as I possibly could. Had that fear, they'd find out and switch my suit, and then I'd have to be embarrassed in front of my coworkers. Terrible fear, standing on that ward that I was going to fly apart. These panic attacks and anxiety attacks, I was having them when they first came out back there in the 50s. Didn't even know what they were, and I would say, I'm going to fly apart. They're going to know I'm just as crazy as these nuts. They're going to put me in the blue pajamas and take away my keys and lock me up in it. And that's the fear I lived in all day long until I'd go up to the club that night. Now, as long as we've got a professional atmosphere here, and this is sort of taking the form of a lecture, I'm going to give you another little bit of education. The easy way. It took me a little bit longer. We agonize over the difference between us and them, don't we? Or they agonize about it. They've spent billions researching us. Well, we have a disease, so they're going to research, get rats drunk and put them in convulsions and all that kind of thing. They research us and do case studies and this kind of thing. And I think, as I agree, they should. If it's a disease, they ought to do it. The tragedy is not one dime has been spent to research them. So I've taken it upon myself to do that. And I'm going to tell you how I've done that. I have lived with one for a long time. I live with one of the worst cases of non-alcoholism you've ever seen in your life. I mean, one of them terminal cases. There's just no hope. You could tie them down and pour the world of liquor in them. It just couldn't convert it. Well, I have wondered why that is. And I've asked her a time or two. There's been 3 times in her lifetime that she's ingested enough to feel it, maybe 5 times. You know what she does? I hate to say this just after you've eaten. As soon as she feels it, she quits. Isn't that the most disgusting thing you've ever heard? Now, to me, that demands research. Somebody ought to look into that. So what I've done is I've asked her repeatedly, why do you do that? And you know what she says, and what she says makes a lot of sense to her. I quit because when I start to feel it, I feel as if I'm losing control. And she'd tell you that tonight. And if you want to, on your way home, ask your spouse, who's that non-alcoholic, why they quit when they started to feel it a little bit, and they'll probably tell you in so many words the same thing. When I would leave that ward afraid I was going to fly apart and be crazy and all that stuff and go up to that club and start to drink, it was the only control I'd had all that day. It was the only feeling of me having any grasp on this thing all day long. She drinks, she loses control. When I drink, it's the only control I ever had. And the overwhelming urge to enhance that control was beyond my resistance. And that's all I need to know as far as what's the difference between me and them. And I don't even need to know why. But I'm satisfied that at some basic level, that's it. And by then I got married. You know how we'll all do that. We'll got to make it. That's how it became a family disease, because we left other. We didn't take hostages or anything. It wouldn't become a family disease, but we all got to go out and take some other people in on this deal and mess them up. And so I married and started having young'uns, and we're all getting sick, which is bound to happen. Now, what alcohol was doing for me was there. It still did what I described for me. That thing I described that I don't need to describe to most of you in this room, it was still doing that for me, but it started doing things to me. It started as it always does, demanding its price. Our friend Clancy out in California says if it doesn't do anything for you, it'll never do anything to you. And I believed it. But it did so much for me so quick that the things to me, the price started happening quick and fast. First thing I noticed, and I was a little slow on the uptake there, but it started hitting me. I started developing amnesia right early there. I would not remember things. I'd wake up in the morning and think I had total recall of the night before. And then I'd get a report on something. One of those deals where somebody has you mixed up with somebody else. I don't know if you ever ran across a deal. And it would just be true enough, sort of, but yet, and then those people always got a witness, don't they? Come here, Charlie, tell him what he did over there. And you hear this thing and you say, by golly, it happens several times. I forgot that. So I started having this blackout thing. Now, I know now that just us alcoholics have those blackouts. You can take one of these non-alcoholics and pour liquor in them until they become comatose, and right before they go under, they'll remember everything. I don't know how crazy they go. Non-alcoholics don't have those blackouts, but I convinced myself just like you did. Everybody does that. Little case of memory lapse, and learn real quick to cover for that. I started being less and less able, and I think this happens to most of us, less and less able to predict the amount I was going to drink. Set out to drink a little bit and wouldn't do that. I'd drink a lot. And maybe not get home at all. My behavior became less predictable and more antisocial. I was doing and saying things that were shameful and added to the guilt and the embarrassment of the people around me, but especially to me. Those things, and you know what I'm talking about, make you shudder and cringe. Those things were happening. And I would resolve to do it different or not do it again, and I started making those resolutions real early along there that something's wrong here. The signals were loud and clear enough for even me to see and hear. But I couldn't really embrace the notion that I was really going to quit. I just had to kind of imagine that it's going to be different. It's going to be better if I just do it right. And then that nagging thing about my father would hit me, you know. Can't turn out like Daddy, you know. And I was becoming violent. These things happening to me were beginning to outweigh the things it was doing for me. And I didn't know what to do. I was in that catch-22 situation that us drunks get into. I was damned if I do and damned if I don't. And as time rocked along there, and all the people were giving me those reports, you know, like they do. You're drinking too much. Why are you drinking so much? And I'm hearing it from everybody. I start resolving to quit. And I started telling myself that lie that some of us begin to tell ourselves. That first lie that alcoholics sometimes start living by. That one that goes something like this: I'm never going to do this again. And I would tell anybody out there who'd listen that. And I've made a bunch of 12-step calls since I've been in this program, and you have too, and you've heard that. And you know when you hear it, that's not a lie to you any more than when I said it, it was a lie to them. The lie was to me. When a drunk makes a statement, and I ain't going to never do this again, that's the most meaningless statement anybody in the world can make. But at the time he or she makes it, we're hurting enough, we're afraid enough, we're whatever enough that we believe. And I made all kinds of resolve. And I know some of you heard my story of the mint juleps. And hell, I don't care. I'm just going to tell it again. You know, we got to have what it's doing for us. And we can't stand to pay the price of what it's doing to us. And I'm about 25 years old. And I'm getting in trouble with life. And it's doing the things to me. And I know at times what's wrong here is my drinking and the lack of control. And I was in the control drinking too. And my control drinking was mainly beer. And believe me, if you're talking to someone who's controlling their drinking, you're talking to an alcoholic. But you know that. Non-alcoholics, believe me, ain't out there controlling their drinking. It never occurs to them to even make that statement. I've probably never in the history of the world has a non-alcoholic said, I'm controlling my drinking now. So when I was controlling my drinking, to prove that I wasn't an alcoholic, I was proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was. And a lot of times that was beer. But I remember I was sitting in the office. I was an insurance man at the time. My executive career, and I was about 25 years old, full-blown alcoholic. And I was looking at Esquire magazine, which is a magazine if you're really on your way up, and you're looking at Wall Street Journal back in the early 60s, and Esquire magazine, you were on your way up. Now, I couldn't pay the rent, but I was doing things like that for image. And I was looking at Esquire magazine, and it had the most beautiful liquor ad you've ever seen. Didn't even have a pretty girl or a guy with a gray temples or anything. Just a beautiful glass of green liquid with the ice in it and a double of sweat going down the side, that kind of thing. Bottle this high-priced sour mash like Rebel Yell or something like that, in there. And it said across there, mint julep. And I'd heard of mint juleps, and I knew that was a drink of dignity for Southern people. And it down there, it even gave the recipe. And it was promoting this, whatever this sour mash was, and it was promoting a brand of creamed mint. If you mixed a jigger of each together and you put it over crushed ice, and if you had a mint leaf stuck that in, you had a mint julep. And it occurred to me, once again, I'd been doing it wrong. I'd been stopping by and getting a case of that cheap beer on Fridays and toting it home. And sitting there and ended up in my underwear every Friday night, drunk, And Kay giving me that look when I come in with that case of beer. When you're controlling your drinking. And you walk in with a case of beer, how your spouse will give that look like they've missed the point. Well, she was giving me that look. That night I came in with 2 sacks. A pint of creamed mint and a pint of I couldn't afford this sour mash. I bought some George T. Stagg, but it was bourbon. Kay hadn't seen the ad and gave me that look like I was going to get drunk. I said, wait a minute. I'm mixing some mint juleps. I'm not about to get drunk tonight. Couldn't wait to show her. You know what I mean? Just couldn't wait to show her. Of course, she wasn't going to touch the stuff, but it was an apartment complex with a bunch of young couples. And there was a couple of the neighbor ladies sitting out there, and I through the screen door, summer afternoon, I said, you want a mint julep? Yes. Didn't have an ice crusher, but I wrapped a towel around, took a hammer and beat up. You've probably done that. And beat up 3 glasses of ice. Took a jigger of creamed mint and a jigger of that George T. Stagg and shook it out. Didn't have any mint leaves, but carried it out there. And me and them 2 ladies sipped on our mint julep. I drank mine a little faster than they did. And it was a comfortable feeling. I remember that I really didn't like the taste of it. And I felt like if you're drinking anything you really didn't like the taste of, you're probably doing the right thing. And they just enjoying it. And I can remember now how their ice, they took so long. You ever drink around social drinkers, how long they take? You want to just cram it down. They took so long that the crushed ice that I had beat up came up into one lump, got all together. But I got my own down, offered them to freshen theirs up. No. Beat me up another one. It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling when you're doing something you know that's right and you analyze what happened that last 50 times. This is the way people drink. Mint juleps. I had never in my life heard of somebody getting in trouble off mint juleps. You probably hadn't either. And I knew I was doing arrested for drinking mint juleps. I had never seen that kind of thing. Yeah. And that's what I did. Now, I will admit that as the night wore on, I beat that towel holes in it. And having a good mind, I decided you don't have to crush the ice. You can just take the cubes, put in there, just as chilled. And it was just as chilled. And I knew that Kay would kill me if I beat up another one of her dish towels. About 10 o'clock, I ran out of ice. That's back before the old ice maker. And I found that just warm a jigger of that mint julep and a jigger of that creamed mint and a jigger of that bourbon, same thing. Absolutely no difference. About midnight, I lost that glass. But by golly, I tell you what you could do. You could take a swig of that bourbon and chase it with the cream of mint And it mixed just as well going down. And there's Casey thought I was going to get drunk. So you know what it was. At midnight, I got green teeth and green... And down to that underwear again. I couldn't stay out of that underwear. That green oozing down the front. Arguing with Kay over, why didn't she have a mint julep with her husband? Now, I could tell you countless deals like that. And I tell that one the most because that's the most ridiculous. But that's the kind of thing, the insanity, the foolishness, the bizarre behavior that goes with this deal where I must invent any crazy scheme to have what it's doing for me without paying that price. And life was going on, and it was getting worse, and things were threatening me, and just life's a mess. I'd get $1 parking ticket and forget it or something, and they'd come out and arrest. Yeah, that kind of deal. I'd get arrested. The police would show up and throw a warrant on me or something. I'd end up in court for $1 parking ticket plus $16.50 court costs. That kind of life would, and the jobs were falling apart, and I was taking lesser and lesser jobs, seeking lower companionship. What Bill says in the book, we sought lower companionship. I'd like to say that I served as a pretty good lower companion too. I'm sure people ended up with me on a given night and it got their attention too. My God, I was with Crawford last night. I better do something about this drinking. So I made a pretty good lower companion. And I was getting kicked out of places that you wouldn't be caught dead in. In fact, I don't even go in some of those neighborhoods now. I don't have any reason to. And I was not welcome there. And those places, when they kick you out or when they kicked me out, they remembered it too. There was no way that would die down. I tried to get back in 3 months later. No, they stopped me at the door. Couldn't go in. And this is this young fellow that was going to be so successful and a good guy and a good husband and prosper. Went to marriage counseling with the minister. Forgive me, Reverend. But if you plan on doing any more drinking and you want, we find all kinds of ways to extend our drinking career. This is a pretty good one if you want to do some more drinking. If you get into marriage counseling like that with no intention to quit drinking, it can prolong it just a little bit. And we'd get in there with the minister and she'd want to talk about my drinking so much that we'd have to send her out of the room to me to get right to the real issue. I don't know if you... He's a Baptist preacher too, and even he was convinced that somebody under my strain could have a little nip now and then. And she was going on and on about it. And that worked too, till I showed up one night blowing about a .22, and he recognized that Kay was probably on target. Hurry this drinking up and get sober. I'm in that situation, living on that lie. I'm not going to do this anymore, and I would resolve to quit with every fiber of my being and mean it with every fiber of my being. And then a week later or 2 weeks later or a month later, that other lie would start surfacing. That other lie that I had to live by. And then it would always go something like, this time it's going to be different. This time I'm only going to drink beer. This time I'm only going to drink at home. This time, no matter what, I'm going to go to work tomorrow. And so I was pulling drunks then. I'd learned about that morning drink. Thank God. I'm going to tell you, I've heard some sad stories from podiums like this. Lost 15 families, I've been to 60,000 institutions, all the stories that we tell. But these guys that get up and say, I drank for 40 years and never took a morning drink, that gets me, I'm telling you. That hurts. I want to just hug them. If I hadn't taken a morning drink, I'd have died. So thank God somebody came along and told me about the morning drink. And then the morning drink went to Bender's, and then around the clock in that bed drinking. I remember Tom and listening to him talk and listening to his tapes over about that, making that decision somewhere between the bed and the floor, falling out of that bed. And I can remember waking up, coming down, if you've ever done that. Do one of them leaps in your sleep and you wake up. Oh, yeah, before I get on to the sobriety, I want to talk about tapering off. I had really learned this from my father, but I later perfected the art, tapering off. Y'all all know what tapering off is. I might get drunk, stay drunk for 3 days. Can't just quit. It'll kill you. Now, them non-alcoholics can't understand that. It'll just kill you. If you just quit abruptly. A doctor will tell you that. You just can't do that. So I taper off. And it was a scientific thing to behold. Here was a raw candidate then dosing himself, and beer was usually it, dosing myself on a certain amount of beer to walk myself down to become sober. Absolutely a beautiful thing to see. I had no nurses, no doctors. I did it to myself. Unfortunately, I lived with a woman that could not tell the difference between drinking and tapering off. It looked... You may have had the same thing. And to the untrained observer, it looks alike. You said you were going to quit yesterday. You drinking today. I'm not drinking. I'm tapering off. You know how... Now, we had this argument all the time. No matter how patient I was, I couldn't explain to her. Now, there were a few times, I will admit, while tapering off, I took on a little too much. I don't know if that... Time or two got plumb drunk tapering off, so you can understand why she could be confused. And, of course, ain't nothing to do but start over if you do that. Now, what was happening on this tapering off deal is I'd pull a 3-day drunk and taper off for 2 more weeks. Well, this was interfering with my job, career deal, and all this kind of stuff because I wasn't going to work. And I was just out there on this limb and drinking around the clock and in trouble and trying everything in the book. And I'm not going to bore you with all the rest of the stuff I did. I'll just say that on the middle of the summer, 1966, I'm coming off another one. And I'm standing there in that dirty underwear that I'm in on every drunk. You know it'll kill a buzz, don't you? There's 2 things that'll ruin a buzz. You all know it. Food and water. Food on the inside and water on the outside. You know that. If you go to showering or anything like that, it'll kill a buzz. So I would make sure I did no bathing during that time. And if you put food in, that will ruin a buzz. It takes light years to get back, so I'd do no eating. So I'd have a little puke down the front of this T-shirt, and that would be, and Kay's Aunt Pearl by then was making junk, or for years had been making joke underwear for all the men in the family. Crazy stuff with lace around the bottom and some dirty stuff on it, this kind of stuff. For a joke. I wasn't investing a whole lot in underwear during this period. The only underwear I had was a series of Aunt Pearl's underwear through the... So if I picture myself in these situations, it'd be that dirty T-shirt and Aunt Pearl's underwear with the crotch down at my knees. And on this day in the middle of July, don't remember what day, I was doing this and I was tapering off with my beer and I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I knew alcoholic, and I didn't have any real preconceived wrong notions about they taught you how to drink and all that business. Because I remember Alcoholics Anonymous used to come call on my daddy. I knew it was a not drinking deal. And I knew when I called Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what we were going to be talking about. And I may have had 98% of my reasoning for making this call that afternoon was to get the heat off. You know how we do them grandstand moves? We join churches and go to the psychiatrist and make pledges and all and get down on our knees. And maybe I had done all that. I'm sure I had and needed one grandstand move that was going to work. And so Kay was out of the house, which she spent a lot of time out of the house during this period, and she was gone. And I called Alcoholics Anonymous in Aunt Pearl's underwear, tapering off. Didn't want the woman at since answering service in Greensburg, didn't want her to know it was me. Couldn't afford to let, my reputation be tarnished. So I told her we was having trouble with my brother, see. And so I described my brother and gave my brother's phone number and all this business. Don't have a brother, but it was all about me. And Bill Norman, who was and is an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous in Greensburg, called me. We began to chat a little bit. And I found out real quick that Bill's about as narrow-minded about tapering off as Kay was. I couldn't understand him. He was a guy from the AA headquarters down there. Didn't want to come out and talk to me while I'd had just a few to take the edge off. And I was ready. I was ready to get somebody there in that house and talk to him. And he didn't come. He wanted to come when I'd quit drinking. It was 10.5 months before I got back in touch with Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, Kay came home that day, and I had in my hand a name and a phone number of somebody from Alcoholics Anonymous, which, like I say, probably that's mainly what I wanted, something to show her. I turned myself in. Here's proof. Mr. Norman, here's his phone number. Now, he and I agree I'm not ready yet, but we want garbage. But here it is. In case I need it. Hold on to this, I said. You drink like I do, and you hand your spouse a name and a number of somebody might be able to help you. You don't need to add, hold on to this. They'll let the young'uns go first. She held on to it. She held on to it so good that one particular bad moment at our house, and I don't need to describe this, you know what I'm talking about, one of those bad times. She called the number. And Kay had been doing things, she'd been out, she'd passed the secret skeleton in the closet stage. You know how when they get past that, they just, how they try to make it look normal, and they hide and they don't tell anybody, and then they'll go tell the preacher, they'll tell the doctor, their best friend, and just after a while, they just break open and tell anybody. That's the way it seems, I just felt like she just stopping people on the corner and saying, got a drunk at home, why don't you come by and say, well, she had gotten past that skeleton in the closet, and she is telling people, telling on me everywhere. But she tells me that this was the first time she was talking to someone, and this was a rank stranger, a strange voice, a strange name on the phone, somebody she'd never seen. But she says this is the first time that she was talking to anyone who not only understood, but who offered a solution. And he listened to her with sympathy. But more importantly, he said, hold the phone. He went and got Lib, his wife, who was in Al-Anon and still is, and he got Lib on the phone with Kay, and Lib told Kay about Al-Anon and got Kay to agree to go. And you know about Al-Anon. Al-Anon's loved me to say this part. You drinking, your spouse gets an Al-Anon. It probably won't cure your drinking, but it'll break your rhythm, I'll guarantee you that. The game changes. Now, you heard me say before that alcoholism is a powerful disease that owns that situation it's in, especially that family, until something happens, somebody gets well. And that's what happened. Kay started getting well, and I couldn't appreciate this. I know now that's what was happening. She quit reacting to my disease 100%. Maybe she just that first week cut it down to 99% and down just picked a little bit more as time went by. She quit responding only to my disease and started acting independent of that disease. I didn't know what to do. There's a friend of mine, Roney, in Burlington, that says that he used to get drunk, and when the family just wouldn't pay any attention to him, if all else failed, he could lay down in the middle of the living room floor and play dead. And finally, the wife, Ruby, or one of the young'uns, would come over and say, Daddy, please, So Said Ruby joined Al-Anon and she got where she could vacuum right around it. And this is the change that happens in a house. The wellness begin to take a little bit of control, and the ism begin to lose a little bit of control. I credit Al-Anon more than any other single thing with my getting here. Not my recovery, but my getting to where recovery is. June the 2nd of 1967, I'm sitting in that chair that I had gotten plumb filthy over the years with these drunks, in that underwear, full of the same fear, full of that aloneness, that panic. And Kay looked at me and said, "You want to call Bill?" This has been almost 11 months. She'd been going to Al-Anon for 5 or 6 months. And I said, "Yes, I do." Now, I said, "Yes, let's do." And she'd been enough Al-Anon to not do things for me. They'd taught you how y'all do. Y'all teach them not to do things for them. But she also knew my state. And that was back when telephones had them little holes and you had to run her around 7 times. And she knew I couldn't do that in that state. And so she did that. She ran the phone around for me 7 times and handed it to me. And old Bill said, "Are you about ready to throw in the towel now?" He knew my story. He knew alcoholism anyway. He didn't even have to hear my story, but he knew specifically what was going on in our home because Kay was telling him. And I said, "I sure am." And we talked a couple of minutes, and he said, "It's a late hour. I'll see you in the morning." That was a Friday night. And come Saturday morning, he was in my house in that living room that Cameron Brown was trying to get back, that house. You know how that is, that when they start calling you, wanting those payments, and you get terrified of that phone. I don't know if you went through that or not. That phone would ring, and I was just terrified of it. There's a guy from Tennessee that said he got to the place where the phone would ring, and he'd be like a dog and point to it, just like a dog barking or something, for somebody else to get it. And I'd be at home, and that phone would ring, and I'd just be terrified of it. I was scared to answer, and I trained myself not to answer. I can remember one time I was on one of those drunks, and there was a time when I would drink to pass out. There was a brief period, 4.5 minutes, where I felt pretty good. And the phone rang during that period one time. And I grabbed that phone like John Wayne, because Cameron Brown in particular had been insulting about wanting that. I was 3 payments behind at the time, been going through a rough time. And I grabbed that phone and said hello, and hoping like the devil it was Cameron Brown. I was going to give him a piece of my legal mind. You know what it was? Sears Home Shopping, sir. Kay had kept the Sears bill paid. First person been nice to me in about 8 years. She's calling me Mr. Crawford and having a special old refrigerator. Nicest woman you ever seen. I was laying in bed in that dirty underwear, chatting with the Sears Home Shopping Service. And I was so taken with her politeness and everything that I bought a refrigerator. Now, you talking about nagging. Do that sometime. When you watch. I wasn't working, but Kay was, and she came home from work, and there was that new refrigerator in there. And our old one pushed aside. She just went on and on about it. I'd forgotten about it. I didn't know what she was talking about. I'd gone back to sleep. That refrigerator, by the way, lasted us 15 years. It was a good refrigerator. Anyway, he came to my house, and he sat with me in that morning in that house, and I better get on off of here. Y'all such a good group. I've talked too long. Somebody should have said, "Shut up." But I'm going to sober up and get off this thing. He told me what we tell people when we go call them. You called out for all kinds of reasons, the wrong reason. To get me my job back. I hadn't been to work in 6 months, but call my boss and tell him I'm called you or whatever, get me back in the big bed or whatever. And whatever reason I had allowed him to come was probably not much of the right reason, but he came and he made the deal with me that we always try to make. He made that contract. He got me to agree to not take a drink that day and go with him to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. Isn't that what we always do? Always try to do. And it was time for him to go. You know what I mean? You know how if they came and called on you, you know how you get nervous and you're ready for them to leave and you'll agree to anything. And he could have said anything. He could say, we require your left ear as collateral. I'd say, cut it off if you'll leave. And I was ready for him to go. I said, sure. I'll not drink today and go to a meeting with you tonight. Now, any fool would know I was too sick to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. I had been drunk for a long time and just sobered up. If you could call that sober, I was just had the booze run out of me. But I'd take care of that later. I'd worry about that later. And I would explain to Kay. I might not even mention to Kay that he had made the deal about tonight. You know, why bother her with that? That kind of thing. But she had heard it. She had had her ear pressed up there at the door and heard that deal. And there was nothing but for us to do but go over that meeting that night. Starmount Group. Clancy remembers it well. So we took the old non-repossessable Mercury. I had a Mercury that was non-repossessable. Here's another tip. If you're going to do some more drinking and you got a car you owe any money on, wreck it just enough that they don't want it back, but not so bad you can't drive it. I had a Mercury like that. You know, they'd show up to repop it, you know, and I'd show them the bad side, you know, and it's, well, maybe we can work out an extension. Well, I took the old non-repossessable Mercury over there. That's all we could do. Walked into a speaker meeting, the Starmount Group, to a real plush room that they used to have that meeting in before it grew so big, and there's probably 20 people there, no more than 20, and plunked myself down in one of those chairs in the midst of those people, feeling just as self-conscious as you did, or if this is your first meeting, as you do. And I sat down there and listened to them do all this ritualistic stuff, this reading and everything. And some old boy climbed up the podium like I'm doing tonight, I have done tonight. And he told this story we tell. This story that I've heard 5,000 times since I've been in this society. Now, I had been sober one day. And if you were the kind of alcoholic I was, or I am, you know that anything I was hearing, I didn't need to be tested on. So I wasn't assimilating. I wasn't bringing in everything that I was hearing. But two big miracles happened in my life that night. Powerful miracle. One was I understood his message. Somehow I understood he was telling me and those 18, 19 other people that he had drunk alcohol hopelessly. That he'd come here to this deal we were doing that night and he hadn't been drinking and life was good. And number two, a bigger miracle, the thing that saved my life, was I believed every word he said. Every syllable he spoke, I believed, for some reason. And you may list the reasons that you may think that's true, but most of us in this room believe that was the grace of God, I think. And I was hooked on Alcoholics Anonymous. I went into the room, he went on to another room and had that coffee and that cake. And all them cake-eating people. You know, your ambitions, or you should be small when you first come in the program. Don't look at that Cadillac or that Jaguar sedan and shoot for it. Shoot for the small things like I did. All them people standing around there, I couldn't, I hadn't drunk any coffee in a long time. Coffee made me nervous. You know what that is? And I was light years away from cake. Yeah. But it seemed like every one of them had a honk of cake that big in there. Yeah. And they'd come up and talk to me and spit them cake crumbs. And tell me how tickled they were that I was there. That cake comes flying all over and they'd slop that cake. So my first ambition was drink me some coffee and eat some cake like that. I turned down everything. And sure enough, a week later, I was spitting some cake on a newcomer, telling him it'll work. And it was a big deal to me. I was surrounded by the winners, and I am going to shut up. I was surrounded by the winners. People tell you to pick the winners, they picked me. I began to learn how to live. That's what we're talking about. I began to learn a recipe for living. You couldn't have heard it put more beautifully than Bob did this afternoon. I learned about God. I had long since been away from God because I was just too ashamed to deal with that. I called myself an agnostic when I came to this thing till I found out that y'all weren't interested. I went up to the Sunday night discussion group and spouted off my mouth about being an agnostic. It dawned on me about the third meeting that people weren't interested in that. They were telling me if you want to live, they were telling me what the 4th chapter opens up with. If you've got what we've got, you're probably alcoholic, and if that be the case, you're suffering from a condition that only a spiritual experience can conquer. It's as simple as that. And I began to do the things that you were doing, not the things you were telling me to do, but the things that you were doing. And I did it after I tried all the shortcuts. Yeah. I decided, that. Let me tell you, if you've been around this program a matter of days, you know who's got it and who ain't. It ain't no secret. You can be around here 2 weeks, and nobody has to get you and say, there's a winner and there's a loser. You know. And I knew very quickly the people who had that thing that I wanted. And sure, it started off with material things, but I soon quickly saw that behind those material things was that look in their eye and that success in life, not with material things. And I'd go interview those people because I wanted to be let in on the plan. I knew there was something, and if I could just hear it and interview them and question them intently enough. And I'd come to things like this, and I'd corner somebody like Mac over here, and I'd get him, and I'd interview him. And I knew one day that one of these old-timers was going to take me in their confidence and call me over and put me under their wing and say, listen, Crawford, we work these steps and everything, but us old rich ones, every time there's a full moon, we bury a dead cat in the backyard. I knew there was something like that they weren't telling me, but as time went on, it became more and more evident that it was not the case. These people were doing what they were saying they were doing and what they were demonstrating they were doing. I like what Bob said about raising the children. If you're going to raise young, if you're going to raise teenagers, you need a program. Let me tell you that. If it ain't this one, go find something. But don't do it by the seat of your pants. Without the program, we couldn't have kicked our daughter out of the house the day after she graduated from high school. Now, you couldn't just say that to any bunch of people, could you? Thank God for the program. We were able to kick our daughter out of the house when she was 18 years old. Be hard to get by with at Kiwanis, but y'all understand that. Now my daughter and my wife are each other's best friend because of this program. We raise those young'uns in this program. Things have evolved in this program, and sometimes they seem like tragedies. Everything, I like that, is a spiritual experience. Everything that happens in our life is leading us toward that good end. And I'm going to tell this and I'm going to shut up. I was in AA for 2 years and 3 quarters. Doing a hell of a job in AA. Chairing meetings, making talks, doing 12-step. Kind of a poster child for Alcoholics Anonymous, if you can imagine. Just a demonstration of what this program was like and how wonderful it was and how wonderful I was. And my boss called me and fired me. Didn't even ask how many meetings I was going to. He just fired me because I wasn't doing any work and I wasn't making this company any money. And part of that job was a car, and he took my car. Kind of like being in jail. I had one phone call. I could call my wife to come pick me up, and I had to make my way on the corner of that lot for her to pick me up. I remember the shame, devastation, ego. In my imagination, when that ego started running wild, standing there at 11 o'clock in the morning, it occurred to me that people passing by would probably guess I was fired. Now, I'd just been fired, and I didn't know where I was going to get my next job. And because of my ego and my sickness at 2 years and 3 quarters of sobriety, my biggest fear, some guy would ride by and punch his wife and say, I bet that guy's fired. So I did what you would do. I looked as employed as I possibly could. I checked my watch and looked busy and didn't start crying until Kay came there and I got in that car. Now, I say all that to say this. That is something that I didn't have the courage to do. I should have left that job a long time ago. They should have fired me a long time ago. But I couldn't make the decision to do it. I'd been coming to these meetings and working these steps and turning me over to God like you had advised. And I look at that as God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, because that opened the door in the long run, not the next afternoon, but in the long run, to employment opportunities and things work-wise beyond my wildest imagination. That's the way God works. That's the way this program works. If you stick around this thing, if you keep doing what these old-timers say, or if you keep doing what these old-timers demonstrate what they do, I tell you what's going to happen to you. I'm just going to bet you. It's the same thing that happened to me. Because I've been hearing the message of this program over and over and over, but kind of missing it because I just was so afraid I was going to drink. I was just so afraid I wasn't going to be able to be like you. And I did the things you wanted me to do because I was afraid not to. And that's a good enough motivation. And because you told me to be generous with me and to give of myself to those who are listened to, those who may be hurting worse than me, I'm sitting somewhere sometime with somebody who's in more pain than me. And I'm listening whether I want to or not to their woes, because that's what you'd advise me to do. And a new and delicious and beautiful feeling overcame me. And it didn't last long, but I didn't know till later what it really was. In retrospect, I look back on that event and realized that just for a couple of seconds, for the first time in my memory, and I'm not talking about just the drinking, in my memory, for just a couple of seconds, I cared more about someone else than I did me. And I'd never had that feeling before. And the next time that feeling lasted a little bit longer. And the next time a little bit longer. Now I can have that feeling anytime I need it. Now I know the essence, the meaning of this program. I know what it is to need to be of maximum service to God and those about me. The only peace, the only comfort, the only fulfillment that I'm going to know is when I am closest to doing that. And when you see me miserable and uncomfortable, restless, irritable, discontented, that's when I'm the furthest from doing that. That's what we're about. That's what this meeting tonight is about. Thank you for being here. God love you.